Pay close attention to what Putin is going to say now.
I'm once again speaking to the soldiers of Ukraine's armed forces. Take power into your own hands. It seems that it will be easier to negotiate with you than with this gang of addicts and neo-Nazis that has settled in Kiev.
That was in 2022. That was the Kremlin's official vocabulary. That was what was on Russian TV every day. For Putin, Zelensky was not a legitimate president. He was an enemy to be destroyed, and he had no problem saying that to the world. Now, pay attention to this second clip. 4 years later,
I just heard again that the Ukrainian side, namely Mr. Zelensky, would be ready for a personal meeting.
Do you realize what happened here? It may seem like a small detail, just a simple change of words. But when the man who spent years calling someone a drugged neo-Nazi starts calling that same man Mr. Zelensky, something very big has changed. And it wasn't by accident. Putin doesn't make verbal slips. Every word he chooses is calculated. If you understand what's behind those two words, you'll understand something that Putin is desperately trying to hide. But it's not just about the war. It's about something much more human than that. Something that everyone has seen in someone else or experienced firsthand. To understand what changed, we need to go back to May 9th, 2026. Victory Day, the most sacred date on the Russian calendar. Every year since 1965, Russia has used this day to show the world its military power. Tanks, missiles, fighter jets, bombers. It's the day when the Kremlin tells the world, we are strong, we are feared, we are invincible. But this year was different. For the first time in almost 20 years, the parade took place without any military equipment. No tanks, no missiles, no armored vehicles rolling through Red Square. The explanation was vague. The Kremlin said it was because of the current operational situation. In other words, the tanks are in Ukraine. And the ones that aren't in Ukraine are afraid to show up in Red Square because a Ukrainian drone might show up before they do. Think about that. Russia, one of the 3 biggest military spenders on the planet, was afraid to display its own tanks in its own capital. The parade lasted 45 minutes, much less than it would normally take. And do you know who was present? Lukashenko, the dictator of Belarus, who has never missed a parade. The King of Malaysia, the President of Laos. Now, compare that with last year's parade. Lula was there. Xi Jinping was there. This year, China sent a second-tier representative. But there was something even more revealing in this parade. Something that had never happened before in the history of Russia. For the first time in history, North Korean soldiers marched in Moscow's Red Square. These same soldiers who fought in the Kursk region on Russian soil to help defend Russia's territory against Ukraine. The announcer called them heroes. Heroes. From a country that barely has enough food to feed its own population. Marching to celebrate the Russian victory in World War II. And there's one more detail that almost no one mentioned. Days before the parade, a Ukrainian drone had landed just 6 kilometers from the Kremlin. Russia was so worried about a possible attack that it shut down mobile internet throughout all of Moscow during the event. And it was exactly in this atmosphere that Zelensky, the same person Putin used to call a drug-addicted neo-Nazi, issued a formal decree with the exact coordinates of Red Square, declaring the area temporarily off-limits to Ukrainian attacks. The Kremlin called the decree a silly joke. But the fact is that the most sacred parade in Russian history depended on the goodwill of the man Putin swore to destroy. Draw your own conclusions. Now comes the most important part. What did Putin say after the parade? After the cameras were turned off and the soldiers returned to their barracks, Putin gave an interview. And that's when he used that expression, Mr. Zelensky.
I just heard again that the Ukrainian side, Mr. Zelensky, is ready to hold a personal meeting.
But that wasn't all. He also said something that caught a lot of people by surprise. I think the matter is coming to an end. And pay close attention. He didn't say war. He didn't say operation. He said matter. As if it were a business negotiation that's about to be finalized. Putin has avoided the word war for 4 years because admitting it's a war would mean admitting that he started it. But the word matter reveals something bigger. It reveals a man trying to downplay the scale of what he created. Minimize. He was preparing the ground for an ending he didn't choose, and it didn't stop there. Putin said he would be willing to meet with Zelensky in person in a neutral country to sign a peace agreement. But only after all the details had been worked out. He concluded by saying, "That should be the final step, not the start of negotiations." It sounds strong, it sounds confident, but think about what that really means. Putin is saying he wants a deal. He's opening the door. He's using the word peace himself. The same Putin who, in 2022, said that Ukraine would simply cease to exist as a country. Think carefully about this change. In 4 years, the man went from, "I'm going to wipe this country off the map," to, "I'd like to meet with Mr. Zelensky." So the question that remains is, why now? What happened that he can't ignore anymore? And the answer, well, it's not in the speeches, it's in the numbers. In the last 28 days, Russia has lost more than 116 square kilometers of territory it had taken from Ukraine. To give you an idea of the size, it's like giving back an entire city in less than a month. Ukraine is advancing in the south. The major offensive in Donetsk, the one Putin promised would be the decisive blow, has come to a complete halt. And April brought something that hadn't happened in Russia since 2024. For the first time in months, Russia lost more territory than it gained. The truth is that the map is changing, but in the wrong direction for Putin. To give you an idea of what this means, do you know what was the bloodiest and slowest battle in modern history? The Battle of the Somme in 1916. Soldiers dying for meters of land in World War I. Independent researchers in Washington have calculated that the Russian advance in Ukraine is slower than the advance of the Allied forces at the Somme. In 1916, with trenches and bullets, this is not just an opinion. These are the numbers from the battlefield. But there's another side to this story that almost no one stops to think about. By February of this year, Russia had already accumulated an estimated 1 million military casualties, dead and wounded. 1 million in just over 4 years. Now compare that to the Soviet Union, which took 4 years to win World War II and lost 27 million people, both military personnel and civilians. Putin is repeating a scale of historical sacrifice, but without a historic victory to show for it. And what about the economy? The truth is that Russia is getting poorer while pouring billions into the war. An anonymous Russian official summed up the mood inside the country for the Washington Post with a phrase that says it all. It seems to everyone that it's already lasted longer than World War II, and even so, we haven't managed to take even a single region. So let's go back to the previous question. Why now? Because reality has set in. And when reality hits a man who spent years saying he was winning, he basically has two choices: admit he was wrong or change the narrative. Putin can't just tell the Russian people, "We lost." That would be the end of him. So he's doing something much more sophisticated. He's changing who the enemy is. At the beginning of the war, the enemy was Ukraine. The goal was, of course, to destroy, conquer, absorb. But now, the enemy that Putin mentions most often is the West.
Revanchism, mocking history, the desire to justify the current followers of the Nazis. All of this is part of the general policy of the Western elites to increasingly foment regional conflicts. Russia will do everything possible to avoid a global confrontation. But at the same time, we will not allow anyone to threaten us. The West would like to forget the lessons of the Second World War, but we remember that the fate of humanity was decided in the great battles of Moscow and Leningrad, Rzhev, Stalingrad, Kursk, and Kharkov.
It's no longer about Ukraine. It's about surviving the West. It's about Russia as the victim of a global conspiracy. The truth is that this change is not an accident. It's a strategy. Because if the war is no longer about conquering Ukraine, but about defending Russia from the West, then any outcome can be sold as a victory. He can say, "We resisted. We survived. The West couldn't bring us down." Putin is building this way out. He is paving the way for a peace agreement that he can present to the Russian people not as a defeat, but as a successful resistance. But this strategy has a problem, and Russians are starting to realize it. Look, Putin's approval rating has dropped to its lowest level since the beginning of the invasion. And we're not talking about Western polls. We're not talking about polls from the Russian government itself. In December 2025, the approval rating was almost 78%. Today, it's at 65%. In a country where people are afraid to speak the truth, a 13-point drop in just a few months is huge. It's a silent catastrophe for Putin. Gennady Zyuganov, leader of the Russian Communist Party inside the parliament itself, said out loud what many are silently thinking. If the government doesn't take urgent measures, by autumn we'll face a repeat of what happened in 1917. 1917. The year the Tsar fell. The year when everything changed in Russia. Now, think about this for a second. If Putin really wants peace, if he's calling Zelensky Mr. Zelensky and opening the door for negotiations, what would you expect the Russian parliament to be approving that same week? On the same day, the world was discussing the 3-day ceasefire, mediated by Trump. On the same day Putin was talking about peace, the Russian parliament passed a law that almost went unnoticed in the news. The law authorizes Putin to use military forces abroad to protect Russian citizens who are being arrested or tried by foreign courts. Think carefully about what that means. Any arrest of a Russian in any country in the world can be used as a pretext for a military invasion. You've heard this argument before. It was exactly the same pretext used to invade Ukraine in 2022. That nonsense about protecting Russians. And it's no coincidence that this law has come up now. It came as a direct response to the international tribunal that 26 European countries are setting up to try Putin for war crimes. The same kind of court that tried the Nazi leaders after World War II. Putin is talking about peace with one hand and legally arming himself for future acts of aggression with the other. And if you still had any doubts about which of the two hands is the real one, 3 days after the ceasefire, Russia launched more than 800 drones in a single day against Ukrainian cities. The largest attack since the war began. Children died. Hospitals were hit. The whole thing that was coming to an end killed more people in one afternoon than in weeks of fighting. And this is where we get to what I mentioned at the beginning, that more human element behind all of this. See, Putin's story isn't just about a lost war. It's about something everyone has seen at some point. In a boss, a family member, a political leader. It's the story of a powerful man who can't admit he was wrong. Who bet everything on a decision, saw it fail, and instead of backing down, kept doubling down. More soldiers, more drones, more propaganda. Because admitting the mistake would mean losing everything. Power, reputation, maybe even his own freedom. And men like that don't stop. They redirect, they pick a new enemy. And they start all over again. The change in the way he treats Zelensky didn't come about because of diplomacy. It's actually the clearest confession Putin has ever made. Without ever using the right words. He's a man who's cornered, desperately trying to control the narrative of the end before the end comes on its own. Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you believe this war will end in 2026? Tell me what you think in the comments. If this video made sense to you and helped you see this war from a different angle, share it with someone who is following this conflict. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time, right? Because this story is far from over and we'll keep following every detail. See you in the next video.